Brad. I'm glad to meet you this morning. If I haven't met you before, and there is a chance, I'd love to meet you in the plaza area over here afterwards and say hi and get to know you and try to remember your name. You have one name to remember. I have many. Welcome to St. Patrick's Day. Do you know St. Patrick is the patron saint of bangers and mash? Trev, that was for you, buddy. The king of accents. It was really good, wasn't it? Yeah. And corned beef sandwiches and green beer, apparently. Which, by the way, he has nothing to do with any of that stuff. He's actually a 5th century Christian missionary to Ireland. And that's a cool thing. The rest of it is just like, that's garnish. The cool thing is he represented Jesus and brought the good news of who he was to Ireland. They haven't done a thing with it, mind you. I'm kidding. If you're Irish, don't be sensitive, okay? All right, so what I want to do this morning is I want to pick up the next phase of a really popular, well-known sermon that Jesus did almost 2,000 years ago. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. And if you've been tracking these last 5 or 6 weeks or so, you know what we've been going through. But I want to summarize really quickly. The first part, the first little better than half of the Sermon on the Mount appears to be Jesus communicating to his people and his culture that he has a conspiracy afoot, and that is to create a kingdom here on earth that resembles the kingdom that we all plan to enjoy in heaven one day. In fact, next week we'll look at his famous prayer where he prays, "May your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And he appears to be thinking about that and talking to a group of disbelieving people who don't think that's possible. But he says it is. And then he meddles deeply inside how it comes about, and it doesn't come about because of changed behavior. It comes about as a result of a changed way of thinking. Actually thinking different things. And then he begins this process of saying, here's how people who are part of my community, the kingdom of heaven on earth, this is the kinds of things they think about. He uses anger, for example. They don't think about stopping being angry. They think rather about being present with the one who is always appropriately angry over the right things, spending a lifetime with him and letting the nature and character of who he is so saturate and marinate their souls, they get to a place where they unconsciously begin to think the things that he thinks. Now that's a different way of thinking. That's thinking different things. In chapter 6, which, Jesus didn't put in the chapter numbers and headings and so on. You know that, right? Yeah. We did that centuries later. And so it kind of breaks the flow. He hasn't changed what he's talking about or what he's thinking about, but now he changes from the consequences of anger, which he's spent a lot of time giving 6 examples of that, to back to the motive of our hearts and lives. And now he begins to talk about something different. And I want to read a section to you today. It's kind of the next section. And here what he's dealing with is the tyranny that a few of us deal with. The tyranny of living for the admiration of others. Now, this is not going to be for most of us, right? But for the one or two, and I'm included, this is for us. This is what he says. Chapter 6, verse 1, watch out. He starts like, watch out. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you'll lose the reward from your Father in heaven. When you give to someone in need, for example, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their act of charity. I tell you the truth, they've received all the reward they'll ever get. But when you give to someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. Have you ever noticed the propensity we have as human beings to put our names on those things that we admire or consider of great significance and value? For example, here are a couple of those. John D. Rockefeller thought it would be really cool to put his name on a really cool building. And it is a cool building if you've ever been to New York and seen the Rockefeller Center. Caesar started something where he put his name on some currency, and we've kind of followed suit. We put Benjamin Franklin's name on our $100 bill. We put our names on beautiful inventions like Ferruccio Lamborghini. I would put my name on that too. George W.G. Ferris thought his spectacular invention was worthy of being called the Ferris wheel. We even put it on life-saving inventions like Henry Heimlich came up with. The Heimlich maneuver. Here's the interesting thing. Here's some things you'll never see people's names on. And that's a mop. You just don't see that. Or a shovel, for that matter. Nobody puts their names on that stuff. Nobody does, because that doesn't scream value. It doesn't scream admiration. It just doesn't do that. This is the effect of the tyranny of living for the admiration of others. But we do it in much more subtle ways as well. Some time ago, I went for a meal at a local restaurant with a small group of friends that I really like. Toward the end of the meal, I slipped away from the table under the pretense that I was going to the bathroom. Rather, I went to find the hostess, gave her my credit card, and said, I want to pay for the meal for this group because I'm just that kind of generous guy. Or I would like you to think I am. She said, of course, Mr. Clausen. Why do they always call us by our dad's name? I don't get that. I went back to the table, and I waited for the moment. You ever done this? Like, you know the moment, right? The moment that she would come back, and she would tell everybody, it's okay, Mr. Clausen paid for your lunch today. And, even if she didn't identify me, if she came back and didn't even do that, of course, all eyes would land on me, and everyone would offer effusive praise and gratitude for me being over-the-top generous guy that I am. Oh, Brad, you're so kind, and you're giving, and you've blessed us, and we're so blessed to have you as our friend. And then I would deftly deflect all the praise and humbly tell them, oh, it's just my pleasure to do that for everyone. Well, and then the moment happened. It actually happened. The hostess came over to the table with the bill and announced to everyone that someone had taken care of the bill and paid our meal. No Mr. Clausen, no wink or nod or anything like that toward me. I don't get any kind of acknowledgement, nothing. And then there's this brief moment of surprise that everyone has, and everyone starts looking around the restaurant to see who possibly they know in the crowd that might possibly have been so generous. They look right past my expectant smile, look for the person who has done this, and eventually seeing no one in the restaurant that they knew and no likely generosity candidate anywhere around, they shrug their shoulders and go about the conversation that we had prior to that. No one put it together that I was the awesome, generous one. And I realized I got nothing for my generosity. I'm thinking, what a waste of money. If no one acknowledged my generosity, there was no reward for the generosity, right? You had no idea your pastor's heart was so dark. Okay, so I may have overstated my thoughts just a little bit. But honestly, part of me was disappointed that no one associated me with that good deed. And in that moment, I was robbed of the joy that could have been mine if my motives and thinking came from a very different spot. It's the tyranny of living for the admiration of others. And this is what Jesus is reaching out to us with today. He wants to teach us about this. And as I said, I was joking. There's more than one or two of us. This is the human propensity. So let's go back to what Jesus says, kind of line by line this morning. There's only 4 verses. And let's see what he's teaching us about the tyranny of being admired by people. Verse 1, as we read already, he says, watch out. Here's a warning. Here's a caution. It's kind of be on alert for something. Don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others, for you'll lose the reward your Father has in heaven. So what is Jesus saying? Well, here's what he's not saying. He is not saying, don't do good works. It's not what he's saying. In fact, a little later, he's going to say, when you do good works, not if you do them. He's assuming that followers of his do good works. It's natural for them. They just do it. It's part of who he is, of being a follower of his. Jesus assumes this. You know why? Because he's the ultimate good guy, good deed guy. He does those all over the place. It's kind of who he is. And not just Jesus, but so many of the New Testament writers strongly encourage good works. Paul does it. Jesus' little brother James does it. In fact, he says if there aren't good works coming from your life, you got to do a little work inside. Look at, there's something terribly askew in your understanding of being a follower of Jesus. This is Jesus' little brother James, who at one point was ready to lock his older brother Jesus up in a padded cell because he thought he was wrong, and now he realizes he's right. So that's not what Jesus is saying. He's also not saying if or when, as my students, you do good deeds, hide them so no one will ever see you do them. It's not what he's saying. And we think it's kind of an act of humility maybe to do that. It's often interpreted as saying, be careful not to do your good deeds publicly, and then put a period there. But that's not how Jesus ends it. He says, don't do your good deeds publicly to be admired by others. See, there's more to it. It's not about not doing your good deeds. If we interpret Jesus to be saying that we should not do good deeds, or if we do, make sure nobody can see them, then we miss out that this is a seamless talk that he's giving, and he's already addressed this in another place. We read it some weeks ago. Just go back about 2/3 of a chapter, and this is what you'll read in Matthew 5:16, in the same way where he's talking to this group about being salt and light, influencers and guiding their culture. He says, in the same way, let your good deeds shine out for all to see. Sounds like a contradiction. So that everyone will praise your heavenly Father. You see, the key phrase, it turns out, is not the good deeds. Not doing them privately. That's not the point here. It's related to our motive. And Jesus would say motive option number 1 is to do them to be admired by others. Motive option number 2 is to be doing them so others admire Jesus. In other words, do good deeds in public unless you're doing them to show off or appear to be more than what you are. In that case, don't let anyone see you do them, which is self-defeating, and you'll end up not doing them anyways. However, if you're doing them to make God look good and appear as good as he really is, keep doing them in public. The litmus test is, why do we do them? Do I tell others about this Jesus-y thing that I'm doing or not? Do I post a picture on Instagram or Facebook or not? Do I slip it into a story or not? Is it public or private? The test is, why would I want to show and tell? See, Jesus is still beating that drum of the internal life. The motives of why we do things, not what we do only. You see, there are times to tell people about something you or those you associate with are doing that are really good things. And then there are times just to remain quiet about what has been done or what you're a part of. You don't see Jesus talk a lot about the stuff that he does, but he does on occasion. There's a time where his really good friend, John the Baptist, actually his cousin, is doubting whether Jesus really is the Messiah. And Jesus tells his friends, go back to John and tell them what? He's really the Messiah. No, go back and tell them the things that you see being done. The healings, the demon extractions. Tell John about the good things that I'm doing. But it is to bring glory to his Father, not just himself as a human being. So Jesus is not saying don't do good deeds, or if you do, hide them. What is he saying? When you do good deeds, and do lots of them, but when you do a quick check of yourself to ask if you're doing them to show off or look good or be admired by others. Just do a quick gut check, if you will. Pause long enough to ask yourself. See, the key words in this verse that we read are to be admired by others. The original Greek uses a single word that we would use to describe a theater, a live performance of some kind, to put on a show. And what Jesus seems to be saying is take a pause, take a break, and ask, am I doing this, posting it, putting on a show with me as the protagonist in the starring role? Is that my motive? Now, this also has to be said. Our motives are seldom, if ever, entirely pure and completely altruistic. Jesus could do that. Since then, there hasn't been a human being who could. But nonetheless, he says to us, with me, you can increasingly think about things and think the things that I do. Moment of candidness. Do you know what my motive is for teaching the Bible on Sunday mornings with you? Do you know what it is? Occasionally, I'll get emails from people who think they know. And way more times than not, they're way too generous in my motives. And occasionally, if that is my motive that they suggest, that's a scary thing. So it could be that I do this because I love to teach the way of Jesus, because I love him more than I can describe to you, because I want to pour my life out for him and give everything I have for him. I was made to do this. I love you so much, and I so want all of us together to form this unique community that Jesus always dreamed would exist on the face of the earth. That could be my motive. It could also be that I have a mortgage to pay and a family to support, and I need to save for some eventual retirement in 30 years. And I have some physical needs I need to take care of, and well, I just really prefer my weekends off, but here I am. Or worse, I could be prone to narcissism and want to be here to get people to follow me and my ideas, to control what people think about me. Now, if you're cynical and you just don't care for me or people in my role very much, you're saying, I knew it. I knew that was the case. But you really don't know what my motives are. I trust and believe that it is love for Jesus and love for you, that first one, that is my sole motivation. But I assure you at times, it isn't all my motivations, and they aren't all 100% pure. Most mornings, and I did it just a few minutes ago as I sat down there, I had to pause and ask Jesus once again and just admit I faced the temptation to stand in front of you today and be clever and to be interesting, to be truthful, to be captivating, to share something with you that would stick with you and would shape your world and your life, and I would get an attaboy for that. It's just part of the temptation when you stand in front of people, whoever the people are. Would you be gracious to me in that, however? Just like we all want to be gracious for motives that aren't entirely pure. So now, before you judge me too harshly, how many days, honestly, do you go to work and the first thought of your day is, the only reason I'm here is to contribute to human flourishing and the well-being of this culture? Let's be honest. There are moments where there is the motive of human flourishing and the well-being of the culture. There really is. But then there are other times where you wish you could stick a knife in your email server. Or maybe a fellow employee or your boss, for that matter. Come on. We have this mixed bag of motives, don't we? All of us do. So we all have to ask ourselves, why am I doing what I'm doing and saying what I'm saying and posting what I'm posting? Why? Can I be honest with myself in this? Why is it that I serve with the toddlers in the kids area? Why is it that I park vehicles here? Why is it that I do what I do? What's the motive here? Motives matter, Jesus would say. And now, after having stated that in that broad introductory statement in verse 1, Jesus is now going to fine-tune that a little bit as it relates to our motives around good deed doing, with God-praising motives around helping people who are in need and why we do that. That's today's. Next week he's going to talk about why do you fast and why do you pray? and deal with the motives of that. But for today, in verse 2, it says, when you give to someone, now let's take that first principle and apply it. When you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their acts of charity. Don't do it that way. This word of someone in need or giving to them is, again, a single word in Greek. It's almsgiving. That's a bit odd term for us, but it's what is used. And almsgiving in Jesus' mind is not just giving money. That's honestly the easy thing for us to do, is to write a check, give some cash, help someone out in that kind of way. And that is part of it, for sure. But there's so much more to it. In Jesus' day, almsgiving was money, but it was also hospitality. In our day, it was serving at the food bank or foster parenting or taking a refugee family in or helping young girls and women escape sex slavery or serving in hospice situations. It's helping anybody in need, as small as that need might be or as on the edge of life and death as it might be. It's all kinds of forms is what Jesus is referring to. Almsgiving is giving the opportunity to those in need, was an essential part of the Jewish culture and the Jewish community ever since God called out Abraham and said, bless the whole world. In fact, in God's view, it appears that giving Abraham the message, bless the whole world, I pick you to bless the whole world, was this whole area of being generous and kind and good. It's part of his plan. Now, I say this to point out that this is not only a high value to Jesus and to the community that he sees being formed, but it was a high value to God as well. Here's a quote from a first century historian. It's amazing to me as I read it this week. By the first century, there was a well-organized system of relief based in the synagogues, providing something of what our state-sponsored welfare system aims to offer. The funding of this system depended on the contributions from the members of the community, which could reach an extent that there were, get this, rabbinic regulations to prevent a person from impoverishing himself and his family by giving away more than 20% of his income. Get out of town. That's actually going on in the Jewish community in the first century. Jesus looks at it and goes, keep doing that. Just keep doing it. I know it's amazing that we actually have to have restrictions in place so that you don't give food and stuff away for your family that would feed your family to bless those who you think are in greater need than your family. Could we maybe do both? That's amazing. This happens all the time in our culture. Well, maybe not. It's amazing. It really is amazing. And this is all the way back to Abraham. This is what the view was. And God says, I'm for that. And Jesus comes along and says, I'm for what he's for because I'm part of him. Let's go do that. Let's build that kind of community. Jesus is all over giving to those in need, and he assumes it's happening. But hold on a second. That is not what this teaching is about, however. It's not. You see, apparently there were some who gave to those in need, but out of a motivation that wasn't primarily to care for those in need. Jesus says that there are some who give as hypocrites. They do good deeds to those in need, but they don't genuinely care for them, but do it because there's some kind of benefit to themselves in the end. He says, don't do it that way. Hypocrisy is out of bounds. Interesting to me is that Jesus uses this word or a derivative of it 17 times. More than anybody else in all of the New Testament combined. There's only a few other times it's used by Paul and by Peter. It could be argued, and some do, that this is a Jesusism that eventually made it into the common language of the day and even into our day. But when it did, it brought with it a pejorative nuance or tone that does not appear to be how Jesus uses it, however. When we use it, we mean someone who says or does one thing, but has some nefarious ambition, or maybe even someone who's a bit of a deceiver. In our culture, you actually don't want to be accused of being a hypocrite. And if you are, you probably have a really negative reaction to it. When Jesus uses it, he probably has in mind what happened on the stage of a beautiful theater that Herod the Great had built in Jerusalem just a few years earlier. Here's a rendering of it. It was right in the center of town. Jesus is thinking of a hypocrite as an actor on the stage of a theater, of this theater maybe in Jerusalem, portraying a character that he really isn't. He's someone in real life that's different than the character he's playing on the stage. So when Jesus uses a term, he's saying, stop, be honest with yourself, about yourself and who you really are. If you aren't generous inside, if it's not a true motive of yours, don't pretend that you are. Don't fake it. Don't fake it. In other words, Jesus is still beating the drum of being honest with ourselves and setting on what really motivates us. And then he says, don't go blowing a trumpet when you give. Just a simple way of saying, don't advertise your giving to those who need if your motive is to show off, to be admired by others, or doing it as an actor on the stage. That's not the real you. Now, as much as it might appear to be that Jesus is making an anti-hypocrisy stand, especially maybe anti-religious hypocrisy, and pleading with us to be honest about our motives before we become actors on a stage, and he is, but if that's all that he's doing, then he's just implemented a new real rule to follow. And Jesus was not doing that throughout this talk. He's not exchanging the old rules, the old law, for a new law, a new set of rules. It's not what he's doing. There's something else here. He's not just saying, don't pretend to be generous if you aren't. See, that would be inconsistent with what he said so far. There's something much more here. So now he tells those on the hillside and us almost 2,000 years later why hypocrisy and giving out of pretend motives to those in need bothers him so much. Why it concerns him. He gives us the why of what this is. So just in case that you thought it was already clear to you, and you thought the why that's on Jesus' heart is to make sure your motives are to do good deeds based on God getting the praise, if that's what you gathered so far, like don't steal the praise from God by taking it for yourself. That's true. And Jesus would agree. But he's saying something much more here. There is actually a primary issue that he wants to point to. The most important thing. And this is his concern. He actually mentions it 3 or 4 times in the 4 verses. 3 times out of the 4. We pick it up in the second part of this verse. This is what he says. Okay? So, after saying this, when you give to someone in need, don't do as the hypocrites do, blowing trumpets in the synagogues and streets to call attention to their act of charity. I tell you the truth, they have received all the reward they will ever get. Jesus is saying that when you do good deeds and you do them to get admired by others or fear of disapproval of people, that's fine. That's okay. Because that's exactly what you're going to get. You will be admired by people. You will get a pat on the back. You'll get a thumbs up on your Instagram page. You'll get the Nancy Pelosi clap. Right? Way to go. That was impressive. I admire you. Jesus is not opposed to us getting a reward for what we say and do. It's just that if we do and say for the reward of admiration of others, we're setting our sights way, way, way too low. And we're setting up ourselves for a far inferior result than what he really wants to give us. And as it turns out, something Jesus knows that you and I desire even more than we desire the admiration of other people. He knows what it is, and now he's going to tell us what in fact it is. It's like having a deep longing for the best burger ever, and you go to, well, let's say the Peoria Artisan Brewery. I don't know if you go there or not. And you order a thick, delicious, juicy, fresh ground, flame-broiled Kobe beef hamburger with crisp, fresh lettuce, a couple of wedges of jumbo pickles, spicy mustard, homemade aioli, a few slices of avocado, deep-fried shoestring onion rings, and of course, thick, crisp Canadian maple bacon on a freshly baked, lightly toasted sourdough bun with sesame seeds. Because that's what you want, and all of you are hungry right now. And instead, this is what comes out of the kitchen. It's a mini burger with cheese and guacamole. How disappointing, right? No fresh ingredients, just enough for one bite. Again, so disappointing because you really wanted something else. I had my sights set on something far, far more filling. It's the difference between this and that. No. I hamburger envy or what, right? What Jesus is saying, to do your good deeds so people admire you will result in a reward, a mini reward, with no fresh ingredients and about the size of a single bite that will never satisfy or fulfill. It might even be trumpets playing in the temple or on the street and people publicly admiring, but it will be vastly less and so disappointing compared to what you really, really, really want, which is the reward of the admiration of your Father in heaven. It's what you really want. It's what I really want. The Father who made us, the Father who loved us, the Father who loves us. The Father who said, it's not too much, really it's not too much, to send my Son into this world, to give up his life, to rescue some other people. It's not too much to ask. I'll do that. Whose admiration do you want? His. We're hardwired for that. He made us for that. He put it in us when we were born, and nothing will satisfy other than his admiration. This is such a big deal to Jesus that just in case they and we missed it, and what he just said, he's going to come back to it again. He's going to add it one more time. But then he adds this jewel in between. Matthew 6:3 says, but when you give to someone in need, it's going to come back to the reward in a bit, but when you give someone in need, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. How exactly do you do that? I'm going to put something on the screen. It's a pink-maned unicorn. Right there. But here's the deal. I don't want you to think about it. I want you to wipe the image from your mind. You can take it down. Don't think about that unicorn. Think about anything else, including this ridiculous illustration if you want to. But not the pink unicorn. Got it? Good? Not the pink unicorn. Do not think about the pink unicorn. What are you thinking about? The pink unicorn. Isn't that the kind of thing that's happening here? Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. How in all the world do you do that when you do a good deed but not think about the good deed that you've done? Remember, Jesus is not talking about changing behaviors here. Just as you said earlier, it's the same talk, it's the same subject. You can't stop being angry by trying to stop being angry. He's still on that same subject. Now imagine this. Imagine being the kind of person after living in close proximity every moment of the day in direct presence of Jesus for let's say 10, 20, maybe 30 years, and over that time increasingly thinking like him because you're with him 24/7 and doing Jesus-y good deeds. Imagine that over that time eventually becoming almost completely unconscious of doing good deeds, and they just become spontaneous outflow of who you have become, simply not thinking very much of what you've ever done. Here's Dallas Willard for the win. This is what he says when he talks about living in that constant presence of Jesus. The kind of people who have been so transformed by their daily walk with God that good deeds naturally flow from their character are precisely the kind of people whose left hand would not notice what their right hand is doing. As, for example, when driving one's own car or speaking one's own language, what they do naturally, even automatically, simply because of what they are pervasively and internally. These are people who do not need to invest a lot of reflection in doing good for others. Their deeds are in secret, no matter who is watching, for they are absorbed in love of God and those around them. They hardly notice their own good deed and rarely remember it. Jesus is teaching from that hillside, and he's saying, all of us can become that person if we will but be with the one who is that person, who will teach us if we come to him as students, as apprentices, as humble learners who say, I don't have that yet, but I want that, Jesus. I want to think the things you do. And he will say, walk with me for your lifetime. 10, 20, 30, as many years as you have. Walk with me in my presence all the time. And over time, eventually the good deeds you do, you won't even notice you've done them. You might be able to think of somebody like that. And then, as if to remind us one more time of Jesus' true concern, he comes back to rewards. The last verse of our section is this. He says, give your gifts in private, and your Father who sees everything will reward you. Don't miss out on the reward your Heavenly Father has. It's what you really want, and it's the best that you'll ever get for doing a good deed. It is Jesus' insight into the engine of our motivation as to why we would do good deeds. For some of us, it might be, well, it offsets the bad deeds I've done. Others, the motivation might be, well, there's personal satisfaction in doing something good. It's just a joyful response to my altruistic kind of personality. And if we were honest, some of us might say, yeah, the reason I do good deeds is I think I'm in line for a new Tesla, or a new job, or a girlfriend, or a boyfriend, or higher pay, or to get into that college, or a baby, or Butch, no more babies. Sorry, bud. No, Jesus says the reward is that your Heavenly Father notices you. He says he notices everything. Your Father who sees everything, he says, he sees what you do in secret, and he sees the motive to do good works is for his fame, and he notices every time you do it with that, every time you act on it, he notices you. He calls you by your first name. He notices you. You see, we all want to be noticed. It's why we put our names on buildings and our most treasured commodities and our inventions and our sweet cars and our medical procedures. We want to be noticed and admired by the one whose noticing and admiration matters more to us than the collective everyone else that would notice and admire us. And that is our Heavenly Father. Humans are hardwired for this. The greatest noticing and admiration does not come from our peers. It comes from the one to whom we most want to belong to and be loved by every day. Humanly speaking, that's our mom and dad. Sociologists have told us for years that emotional and mental health experts keep reminding us that a healthy, loving home environment permanently sets in the hearts and minds of our children the confidence to live well in a chaotic world. When my son Matt was 9 years old, he came to me with the drawing that he had done, actually a whole series of drawings. At the time, it was his artistic expression, and I remember clearly, I lived it again this week. I remember the day he brought to me a series of cars that he was drawn when he was 9 years old. I still have one of them. It's this one right here. I think we would have put a picture up there. He handed it to me and said, look at this, Dad. And right at that moment, I was preoccupied with something, didn't think to stop and see really what he had drawn. I didn't give him much of my attention. You know, like we do as parents, right? We do that. I glanced over and I gave a generic, hey, that's great, Matt. Well done. And I carried on. Matt showed me a couple more, and this time I gave no response. I didn't know how many seconds or minutes passed, but the next thing I felt was Matt tapping me on my arm, wanting to get my attention. Dad, look at these. I drew them for you. Time stopped for me. I think there are always moments in maybe our parenting time we regret. In a time of kind of surreal moment for me, I heard the deep longing of my little boy's heart. Those were not just drawings that he had done for self-expression or because he likes cars or it was a little boy fun. He had done them for me. This was personal. And what he wanted from me, what he needed from me, was for his dad to notice him and admire him and reward him with my attention. This moment is why I still keep these drawings, and I keep them in a very special place. They're more important to me than my passport or legal documents I keep. Matt did not draw them for me, so I would take him to McDonald's or give him a trophy or give him $20. I think those were the teen years. No, all he wanted was for me to notice and admire him. Watch me, Daddy, our kids say. Watch me jump in the pool. Watch me ride my bike, Mommy. Listen to me play the song. Kids need attention and admiration of their parents, and so do we. Our healthy desire is to be rewarded, to be noticed, to be admired by our Heavenly Father, and that is the desire that we long for. But here's the thing. That desire is so strong that if we don't find it in Him, we will look for it someplace else, like a coach or a boss or a spouse or a career or stuff, and that is unfulfilling, and it's a hamster wheel. We boast, we promote, we brag, we post, we tell stories, we show off, but we never really are truly content. It is found, and Jesus knows it, in Him and the Trinity. Okay. Oh boy, application. I have a few suggestions here. Rather than call it application, could we call it maybe spiritual development exercises? Could we call it that? Maybe these are some things you could do that would possibly be formative in your thinking. The kind of thing that an apprentice to Jesus might do, and where it ultimately would become natural and increasingly a way of thinking like He does. The Holy Spirit will probably prompt you in some other things, but this is just to prime the pump a bit. One has to do with social media because it's low-hanging fruit. Before you add your next post or some cool thing that you discovered or did or said or read or ate, please stop posting food, please. Before you post any of that, post this. I am about to show you something that I hope makes me look good or cool or smart or pretty in your eyes, and it causes you to admire me. And then post it, if you still want to. It's just a spiritual exercise. Here's another one. Do some inconvenient, out-of-the-way good deed and tell no one about it, not even God. And feel both the disappointment and the thrill of no one knowing. Here's another one. Notice and express admiration to someone this week who you feel you need to compete with for attention and admiration. That might be a sibling, a spouse, a friend, a teammate, a fellow student, a peer at work. Trust me, you'll think of someone. Feel how hard that can be, and the shock that it can create, and the deep joy of being admiring over being admired. Mostly, take some time each day when you're at your best to be alone with Jesus. In your office, in your car, in your bedroom, in your bathroom, for crying out loud, wherever. And just be silent and listen for the works and the words of affirmation that He has for you, and then you stack that against anybody else's admiration. It'll shine. There's a verse in the Old Testament, something we don't read often, you might never have read before, in the book of Zephaniah. Yeah, it's actually there, Zephaniah. It says this, for the Lord your God is living among you. He is a mighty Savior. He will take delight in you with gladness. With His love, He'll calm all your fears. And get this, He will rejoice over you with joyful songs. Do you know that God sings songs of praise over you? It's the way He admires you and expresses it to you. This is good news from Jesus. It really is. Now, Jesus, having taught us this, would you also coach us and help us along the way? Would you direct us and guide us in this? Would you show us how we can think different things? Think like you increasingly, Jesus. We'll be really grateful for that. Thanks for admiring us so much and expressing it, singing songs of praise over us. We're really grateful. Thank you, Christ our King. Amen.